Ladies and gentlemen, we are standing at the edge of a transformation that is bigger than politics, bigger than borders, and bigger than economics as usual. Mexico is not just America's neighbor, it is about to become the central force that redefines the future of the United States. For decades, when people thought of power, they looked to Washington, Wall Street, or Silicon Valley. But today, the winds of change are blowing south, and Mexico is emerging as the unexpected catalyst of America's next chapter. Think about this. Geography has always been destiny. The U.S. has long been shaped by its Atlantic and Pacific coasts, but now its destiny lies in its southern border. Mexico is no longer simply a low-cost manufacturing partner. It is positioning itself as a hub of innovation, energy independence, and geopolitical leverage. As global supply chains are being rewritten, Mexico is where the future will be built, and the United States will feel its impact in every industry, every job market, and every strategic decision. This isn't speculation, it's already happening. Factories that once stood in China are moving to Monterrey. The energy pipelines that power American cities now depend on cross-border cooperation. And the cultural exchange between both nations is creating a dynamic workforce that blends resilience, creativity, and ambition. What we're seeing is not a marginal shift, it is a tectonic one. The question is not whether Mexico will shape the future of the United States. The question is whether America is ready to adapt to this new reality, to partner, to compete, and to grow stronger through this transformation. When we look at the future of the American economy, we often get lost in conversations about Silicon Valley, Wall Street, or the next technological breakthrough in Boston or New York. But the deeper truth, the one that is reshaping the trajectory of the United States in ways many people still underestimate, lies just across the southern border. Mexico is no longer a peripheral player in America's growth story. It is becoming the very engine that will drive the next chapter of U.S. prosperity. What makes this moment so profound is the shift in global supply chains. For decades, the world was dependent on China as the workshop of the planet. Low-cost labor, vast production capacity, and integration into global markets made China the undisputed center of manufacturing. But the tides of history are shifting. Rising labor costs in Asia, growing geopolitical tensions, and the vulnerability revealed during the pandemic have forced global corporations to rethink where they build, where they source, and where they invest. And when they look for a solution, their eyes are increasingly turning to Mexico. Why Mexico? It comes down to geography, economics, and strategic alignment. Mexico shares a 2,000-mile border with the United States. No ocean, no continent, no weeks-long shipping journey separates the two. Goods can move from Monterrey to Dallas in a single day, from Tijuana to Los Angeles in a matter of hours. That immediacy is invaluable in an era where speed defines competitiveness. Companies can design, manufacture, and deliver in real time, eliminating the costly delays that global shipping once demanded. Then comes the trade advantage. Mexico is bound to the United States through one of the most significant trade agreements in modern history, the USMCA. This framework doesn't just open doors, it locks in long-term cooperation, reduces barriers, and makes Mexico the natural choice for U.S. industries that want both cost efficiency and legal stability. Compare that with rising tariffs, trade disputes, and restrictions that complicate U.S.-China relations, and you can see why corporations are racing south, not across the Pacific. Consider what this means for specific industries. The auto sector, which has been the backbone of American industrial strength for over a century, now relies heavily on Mexican factories for parts, assembly, and innovation. As electric vehicles reshape transportation, Mexico is becoming a crucial hub for battery production and component integration. The same story plays out in electronics, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and even agriculture. When you peel back the layers of the U.S. economy, economy, you discover that its ability to remain competitive is increasingly tied to Mexican production capacity. But it's not just about factories. Mexico's rise as an economic engine is also about people, the labor force, the human capital that drives innovation and sustains industries. Mexico has a young, growing workforce at a time when many advanced economies, including the United States, are aging. This demographic advantage means that the U.S. will lean more heavily on Mexican workers, ideas, and partnerships to fill gaps in its own labor market and to remain dynamic in the face of global competition. And let's not forget energy. Mexico's vast natural resources, including oil and renewable potential, are becoming intertwined with America's push for energy independence and sustainability. Pipelines, grids, and cooperative energy projects bind the two nations together, ensuring that the U.S. cannot think about its future energy security without Mexico at the table. Now, some might say this sounds like dependency, that America is simply outsourcing its future, but the reality is more nuanced. This is not about weakness. It is about synergy. Mexico and the United States are building an integrated economic system that amplifies the strengths of both. American capital, technology, and demand combined with Mexican labor, resources, and geography to create a powerhouse that can compete with Asia and Europe on a scale neither could achieve alone. If you listen closely, you can already hear the hum of this transformation. Industrial parks in northern Mexico are expanding at record pace. Ports and highways are being upgraded to handle the surge in goods. Multinationals are announcing billion-dollar investments in Mexican cities that many Americans have never even heard of, but will soon shape their daily lives through the products they buy and the prices they pay. The story is unfolding and it is accelerating. Mexico is not just a neighbor, it is becoming the new economic engine that will power the United States into the future. To ignore this is to miss the very heartbeat of tomorrow's prosperity. To understand it is to see that America's future will be written not just in New York or Washington, but in Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Tijuana. And so when we talk about the U.S. economy, when we ask how America can maintain its global edge, we must widen our lens, because the answer lies in partnership, in proximity, in the shared destiny of two nations whose fates are now inextricably linked. The United States cannot rise without Mexico, and Mexico cannot rise without the United States. Together, they are becoming the twin engines of growth, resilience, and innovation. And this, more than anything else, is why Mexico is about to change everything for the U.S. When we speak of Mexico's rise, it is tempting to view it only through the lens of trade and industry. But the truth goes much deeper. What is unfolding is not simply an economic shift. It is a geopolitical transformation that will redefine America's place in the world. Mexico is not just producing cars and electronics. It is reshaping the balance of power, altering the very strategies that the United States will need to adopt in the decades ahead. Consider energy. The pipelines that stretch across the border are not just steel and valves, they are lifelines of national security. Natural gas from Texas flows south, while Mexico's oil and renewable potential flow north. In a world where energy is weaponized, where nations are cut off and economies are strangled, the U.S. cannot afford to ignore the critical role that Mexico plays in keeping the lights on, the factories running, and the costs of energy stable. Mexico is not a footnote here, it is central. The more the U.S. leans into this partnership, the more resilient it becomes against external shocks. Now turn to migration. For too long, American politics has treated migration as a crisis to be solved rather than a force to be understood. But migration is not just about border patrols and politics, it is about human capital, demographics, and the future of work. The United States is an aging society, its birth rates are declining, its workforce is shrinking. Mexico, by contrast, has a younger population, more dynamic, eager to work, to build, to create. What the U.S. perceives as a challenge is in reality one of its greatest strategic advantages. The infusion of Mexican labor, culture, and vitality into the American fabric is what will allow the U.S. to remain vibrant and competitive when other advanced economies stagnate. This is not only about economics, it is about identity. The blending of cultures across the border is reshaping the very idea of America. Spanish is becoming more widespread, Mexican traditions more celebrated, and communities more integrated. This cultural exchange is soft power in its purest form. It binds the two nations not through treaties alone, but through families, neighborhoods, and shared experiences. The result is a North America that is not just a geographic term, but a living, breathing community of destiny. Geopolitically, the timing could not be more critical. The U.S. is confronting a multipolar world, China rising in the east, Europe struggling with its own crises, and conflicts threatening global stability. In this new order, America's strength will not come from acting alone. It will come from building alliances that extend beyond formal diplomacy and military pacts. Mexico is the natural anchor of that alliance. With Mexico firmly aligned, the U.S. not only secures its southern flank, but also builds a continental bloc of resilience that can project influence, stability, and prosperity into the wider world. Think also of security. The old model of seeing Mexico as a problem, whether through the lens of cartels, migration, or border disputes, is rapidly giving way to a new model of shared security. Both nations are realizing that threats do not stop at the border, whether those threats are climate disasters, pandemics, or criminal networks. The only way forward is joint strategy, joint intelligence, joint resilience. Mexico is not a liability to U.S. security. It is a partner without which U.S. security would collapse. What we are witnessing is the rise of Mexico as a co-architect of America's future. This is not about dependency, nor is it about rivalry. It is about a partnership born of necessity, geography, and history. The U.S. can no longer dictate terms as it once tried to do. Instead, it must embrace a world where Mexico stands beside it, shaping decisions that ripple far beyond the Rio Grande. So when we talk about the future of U.S. power, we must ask, what does it mean to have Mexico as an equal partner in that journey? It means that the United States will no longer be a solitary superpower trying to carry the burden of leadership on its own. It means that America's strength will increasingly come from integration, from cooperation, from a shared North American identity. The stakes could not be higher. If the U.S. embraces this transformation, it will find itself more secure, more resilient, and better positioned to lead in a turbulent world. If it resists, if it clings to outdated notions of dominance rather than partnership, it will squander one of the greatest opportunities of this century. The truth is clear. Mexico is no longer a neighbor waiting at the margins of U.S. policy. Mexico is a force at the center of America's future. Its role in energy, in migration, in security, and in identity will shape not only how the United States competes, but how it survives in a rapidly changing world. Mexico is not about to change everything for the U.S. It already is. And the only question left is whether America will rise to meet this transformation with vision, humility, and courage.